Let's start by naming the reality that everyone feels but few will admit. That universal basic income, or UBI, isn't just some futuristic welfare program or Silicon Valley pipe dream. It's an ancient idea with Enlightenment roots. And today, it sits at the fault line where the old world is eating itself alive. The truth is, when the rich and powerful start flirting with UBI, it's rarely out of compassion. It's a calculated move. Anti-revolution insurance. A way to keep the pitchforks in the barn one more generation. But UBI is more than that, if we understand what it's for and where it comes from. Long before tech moguls put free money on the table, Thomas Paine was arguing for a groundbreaking principle in his pamphlet, Agrarian Justice. Paine didn't come up with the idea from nowhere. He stood in the shadows of the Enlightenment, looking back at Locke, at the very foundation of property and sovereignty. Locke argued that the earth was given in common to all mankind, and only through labor could an individual lay claim to any part of it. But Paine went a step further. He recognized that private property, by its very existence, expropriated a natural inheritance that belonged to everyone. His answer was not to abolish property, but to tax its exclusive use, to return to every person a birthright that the system had quietly stolen. In Paine's words, the earth, in its natural, uncultivated state, was and ever would have continued to be the common property of the human race. That was the original ground tax, a fund raised from landowners, not as charity, but as justice, distributed equally to all as compensation for being excluded from the commons. This wasn't welfare. It wasn't a gift from the benevolent rich to the needy poor. It was a recognition that every structure of civilization, private land, profit, market, rested on a foundation of exclusion. And if that exclusion could not be ended, it had to be compensated. The world Paine saw was just beginning to industrialize. Today, we're living at the terminal point of that process. Every technological advance since the steam engine has sharpened the contradiction. Productivity soars, wealth piles up, and the basic costs of survival get locked away behind higher and higher paywalls. The more the machine produces, the less the worker keeps. The logic of capitalism is simple. Profit requires scarcity, and scarcity must be manufactured even as abundance becomes the new default. Now, we're facing a reality Paine could only have imagined. We're on the brink of automation wiping out entire industries, from factory floors to corporate boardrooms. Artificial intelligence, robotics, and network logistics have made it possible to do more with fewer people than ever before. In this world, the old justification for wage labor, that survival depends on your usefulness to an employer, breaks down completely. The only reason anyone is still scrambling for scraps is that the machine of profit requires them to be. So why are the rich, the technocrats, and the strategists suddenly interested in UBI? Because they see what's coming. The logic of the system has always been to defer crisis, to avoid the revolution that would come if people truly understood the scam. UBI for them is the ultimate shock absorber. If you can keep people just comfortable enough, just distracted enough, you can keep the wheels of profit spinning a few decades longer. It's a safety valve, not a step toward liberation. If the bottom drops out of the job market and millions find themselves obsolete, UBI is the stipend to keep the peace. It's a calculated bribe to buy time. But Paine's vision and the true Enlightenment answer was never about managing unrest with charity. It was about restoring agency. He called for a ground tax because he saw the foundation, the land, the commons, the birthright of all. Every person deserved a material basis for freedom, not at the pleasure of the market, but as a matter of justice. In a post-industrial, post-scarcity world, this argument is even stronger. If technology has rendered most labor obsolete, and the means of production can provide for everyone, then the logic of ownership, profit, and gatekeeping has reached its natural end. The only thing standing between us and abundance for all is the operating system of capital itself, a system that demands artificial scarcity to justify its continued existence. UBI, when understood as a transitional tool, is not a utopian endpoint, but a ramp to the next phase of civilization. It's the shock absorber that buys time for society to re-engineer itself around the true promise of the Enlightenment: liberty, equality, the pursuit of happiness as lived material realities, not empty slogans. A UBI is a minimum, a floor, never a ceiling. It is not the reward for good behavior or the price of obedience, but the down payment on a society that recognizes every person's right to exist, participate, and create without the constant threat of destitution. What the rich fear isn't poverty. They've insured themselves against that 1,000 times over. What they fear is the moment when enough people realize that UBI is just the first crack in the old order. They fear that once the basics are guaranteed, people will ask the question, why should a handful of owners, not society as a whole, control the means of production? Why stop at a subsistence check when the productive capacity of humanity can provide abundance, freedom, and time for all? This is why the Enlightenment matters now more than ever. Paine saw a future where justice was not charity, where the foundations of wealth were open for all to share. Today, we can go further. We don't just have to compensate for lost inheritance. We can engineer a world where no one is locked out to begin with. But getting there means refusing to let UBI be the end of the conversation. It is a shock absorber for capitalism's collapse, not a license to keep it running on fumes. It is a tool, not a surrender. If we treat it as the final achievement, we miss the chance to finish what the Enlightenment began, to build a civilization rooted in the primacy of life, not profit, where everyone's birthright is honored and no one is a stranger in their own world. That's the real revolution, and it's the only future worth fighting for. UBI is not a payoff to keep us quiet. It's the down payment on the post-scarcity world that's already within our grasp. If we have the courage to see through the illusion and demand nothing less than our birthright as free, equal, and sovereign beings.